You've coined the term Nutritarian, and most people know you as the Nutritarian guy. And with that in mind, I think a good starting point is what is a Nutritarian and what is a Nutritarian diet or a Nutritarian like focused diet?
Yes, and I think it's a good word and an important term. I really do. And that's because, what does plant-based mean or even vegan? Plant-based, does that mean all vegan or not? And it's just like such a vague term. And then vegan, it's all vegan, but you don't know if it's really healthy. And then whole foods plant-based, it's still very confusing. You don't know, I don't know what that means either because it's still the word plant-based, is it? But in any case, the point is a nutritarian diet is designing a diet to be trying to look at food and put together a dietary portfolio that's going to maximally extend human lifespan, prevent disease, and maintain a healthy life expectancy into our later years. So let's design a healthiest diet we can with all the nutrients humans need. And certainly, it is mostly or all plants. I mean, I do advocate ideally a vegan diet, but I don't just take any kind of vegan foods. I want people to eat a lot of green vegetables. I want them to eat flax seeds. I want them to eat cherries and pomegranate and berries. I want them to eat beans every day. I want them to eat a lot of green vegetables, both raw and cooked. And in the green vegetables they're eating, I want them to consume raw cruciferous, cooked cruciferous, raw non-cruciferous, and raw and cooked non-cruciferous. In other words, I'm putting together a dietary portfolio that affords people better long-term health outcomes and picking a wide diversity of healthy plant foods with enough green vegetables. And of course, a nutritarian gets their fat from nuts and seeds and avocado, not from oils and animal fats, like most Americans do and most Europeans do. So the point is that, and as you know, there's a lot of well-known plant-based nutritional experts and gurus that recommend you watch your fat or you eat very low fat or you cut out nuts and seeds. And I'm saying that is incorrect and does not maximize human lifespan and is not, it's rarely good for anybody to cut their fat down that low because you don't facilitate the absorption of the anti-cancer phytochemicals from the vegetables as well when you take all the nuts and seeds out of your diet. So I do have a particular dietary model that I'm instructing people to follow, but I'm not being inflexible with the model itself. You could modify that model to your own particular needs and likes, you know what I mean? And we're not all robotic, duplicates of each other. You can make some modifications to my general recommendations, but nevertheless, the general recommendations still advocate people include a certain amount of healthy nuts and seeds. Like I want people to eat a minimum of a half an ounce of nuts with each meal, about an ounce and a half of nuts a day minimum. So why? Because of my physical activity, I might be eating an ounce with each meal, and I'm eating 3 ounces a day. But I'm not taking all the fat out of a person's diet, and I'm not having their diet be focused around one particular food. I want them to get a lot of different types of foods in their diet for as much nutrient diversity as possible. And I have this acronym, GBOMBS, which stands for greens, beans, onions, mushrooms, berries, and seeds, because I want people to pay attention to having food from all those different categories, which have been shown in many scientific studies to have longevity promoting and anti-cancer benefits. And I'm also saying that the anti-cancer benefits from these different categories of food is much more marked and stronger than most people realize. And a dietary portfolio that puts together these beneficial foods in a synergistic fashion gives people, even who have cancer, a greater chance at longevity and at remission or non-recurrence than, for example, than conventional treatments do. So I think that the dietary, most people know that diabetes can be reversed when you eat healthy and heart disease can be reversed. And they don't really know that lupus can be reversed and psoriasis and asthma, that we see these conditions reverse, and they don't see the huge benefits we get to prevent cancer, but also for people who already have early stage cancers, how much that could change, that could mean a difference in life and death. So yes, I'm saying right now is that the same dietary portfolio that's been prepared with the attempt to maximize human longevity is also most therapeutically effective when we're applying it to most disease states to facilitate people to get well or reverse their diseases.
So obviously, when we do look at that food scene at the moment, and there's so many different stances on food and dietary patterns, and obviously we have, as you mentioned earlier, whole food, plant based, but we don't actually know what that means a lot of the time, especially vegan diets as well. That can be a very ultra processed vegan diet. That can be a very what I will consume a very, if it's whole foods, a more healthier, plant-based diet. However, then you also have, keto, paleo, and but how is the nutritarian diet standing up against something like paleo or a whole foods plant-based diet?
Right. And by the way, I'm an advocate of a diet being SOS free. Do you know what that means? So I
Salt
don't,
and sugar and oil.
yes, sugar and
Yeah.
oil free. So I don't recommend free sugar. I don't mind if people use fruit to sweeten things and make desserts with bananas and things, but I don't want them to put maple syrup and honey and sugar on their diet. And I consider white flour to be a sugar equivalent. So we're not using these high glycemic carbohydrates, and we're also not salting our food. We're using roasted garlic and herbs and spices and different flavorings to get out of, make food taste good without just putting salt on it. And that's a huge controversy in itself about people think that salt is good for you and necessary to eat. And I'm saying, well, you're really a very comprehensive look at populations that don't salt their food, show tremendous protection against cardiovascular death and maintaining normal blood pressure and preventing strength and integrity of the brain, or the vessels in the brain as you get older from not hemorrhaging and breaking with later life. Because one thing we know that being a vegan does not protect you against hemorrhagic stroke if you still salt your food. And we could talk about that more if we have to later. But your question was about keto and paleo and, and other types of diets. I don't really think there's much of a competition here, because, I've spent my life reviewing probably 50,000 scientific research studies, on this. And even in and we know that, for example, there's a dose-dependent relationship between vegetable consumption and lifespan. There's not a dose-dependent relationship between eating animal products and lifespan. In other words, there's more than 100 studies showing the more vegetables a person eats, the longer they live. Now, what about the more meat or more scallops or more, what about that stuff? More, obviously, that's not what the data shows if you look cumulatively at all the evidence. You can selectively pull certain evidence that you'd like to utilize to contribute to your argument, what all people do. But if you have if you're trying to look at an unbiased viewpoint at at all the evidence we have available, we know that more vegetables in the diet leads to longer lifespan, and less animal protein leads to longer lifespan. But what we do have, and by the way, there's more than 50 studies, by the way, which I published in a recent scientific journal article describing why people with heart disease should not remove nuts and seeds from the diet, published in the International Journal of Disease Prevention and Reversal, with more than 50 references of why when you take the fat out of your diet, remove all nuts and seeds, you increase chances of arrhythmia and potentially increased risk of cardiovascular death. It's not beneficial to take all the fat out of your diet. But now we're talking about the studies that have shown that the more animal protein you eat, the shorter your lifespan. And there's been about a dozen separate studies that corroborate each other with the same with the same information, that more animal protein means more premature death. And here's the shocker. And what these studies, and I didn't, I don't have the studies with me right now, but I could bring them up on my computer and show it on the screen. But what these studies also showed was that the more plant protein a person eat, the longer they lived. Okay, so what it showed was, and this is not one study, these are studies that are large scale studies studying hundreds of thousands of people, and they have hard endpoints like death or age of death. So these studies are done for like 20 or 30 years following large populations. And there are different studies with each one individually with hundreds of thousands of people, and they all show the same thing, the same results. So we have a lot of corroborative evidence. So the evidence becomes more solid and more proven when one study shows the same thing as another study shows. And we have that in the field of nuts and seeds. We have when you don't eat nuts and seeds, when you eat nuts and seeds, you have less both cardiovascular death and all-cause mortality. And when you eat more animal products in your diet, you have shorter lifespans and all-cause mortality goes up. But the shocker is that the more plant protein that was eaten, the longer people lived. And what does plant protein mean to you? What does it mean to me? And I'll tell you what it means. It means a nutritarian diet, and I'll tell you why. Because we advocate people eat green vegetables, beans, and nuts and seeds. Those are high protein plant foods. There are 5 plant foods, right? And there are fruit, whole grains or intact grains, vegetables, beans, and nuts and seeds are the 5 categories, right?
Mm-hmm.
And intact grains have a decent amount of protein. Fruit doesn't have much, but the ones with the most protein are green vegetables, beans, and nuts and seeds. And when you combine greens, vegetables, nuts, and seeds in a diet, you get a new degree of protein adequacy. We get protein that becomes adequate for an athlete or for an elderly person without having to add animal protein to the diet. And we know that protein bioavailability goes down with aging. What I'm saying right now is we don't maximize lifespan on like a potato-based diet or a rice-based diet, like a macrobiotic-based diet, or a fruit-based diet. We're eating mostly fruit. Let's say you're eating 60% fruit. Well, because that's going to lower the protein exposure because fruit is not eat 20% fruit, that's fine, but don't make your diet 60% fruit or 70% fruit because you're not going to get enough protein adequacy, especially as you age. And that's what's one of the things wrong with adding oil to your diet. If you took in 200 calories from oil, well, if your diet is isocaloric and you put in 200 calories of nuts and seeds in place of the oil, you would have just added 7.5 grams of protein to your diet when you put the nuts and seeds in instead of the 200 calories from oil, which gave you no protein. So what I'm saying is that it's not only the protein. You're getting a lot of other beneficial substances as well when you use the whole foods. But I'm saying that the data from all these studies is corroborating and supporting this idea that as an animal, we maximize lifespan when we eat green vegetables, beans, and nuts in our diet.